Thank you.
I'm waiting for it to move.
Oh. Sorry?
Board docs.
Board docs.
There we go. It's a delayed reaction. Thank you. Mr. Bouban?
Here.
Mr. Coughlin?
Here.
Mr. Fry is excused. Ms. Fitzgibbon?
Here.
Ms. Hoppy?
Here.
Mr. Jackson?
Here.
Ms. Patterson?
Here.
Ms. Sorg?
Here.
Mr. Murphy?
Here.
President Sullivan?
Here. Good evening, everybody. We will open the meeting tonight with public comment. If there are any members of the public who wish to address the board, as I expect there may be, we invite you to approach the podium. Advise you to speak close to the mic so that it picks up your remarks, and ask you to limit yourself to something in the neighborhood of 3 minutes.
I think I can do that.
I expect you can.
I think I can do that. First off, I want to pass out some packets that I prepared for you. I don't expect you to read them right now, but I would appreciate it if you did take them home and read them tonight. I worked hard on these. It's an easy read. I'm a good writer. You'll fly right through it. I have enough for everybody, including Ms. Singletary tonight. Take one pack and just pass it on. For those of you who might not know me, I'm Julie Dixon. My husband Steve and I share a border with your very large parcel, almost 1/10 of a mile long. We're the ones who have a standing offer to purchase your property. I spent the last 2 weeks after the last meeting trying to get behind this idea of a prescribed burn on your property, and I haven't been able to do it after what I've learned. Despite all the liabilities that a fire would bring to you, I sense that the board is ready to go forward. So I prepared this little packet, and I want to take just a couple minutes to summarize quickly what's in that packet. My first concern is that prescribed burns always cause animal deaths. On DNR's webpage, if you've gone to it, you've read it, you know that they start a fire at the top of the parcel, then they start the bottom, then they let those fires advance, then they light the flanks. And that forms a ring of fire from which animals can't escape. And it's usually mammals because they can't fly away. Next is the proliferation of weeds. According to the USDA's own website, they have a database. Fire is not an effective tool against common weeds like garlic, mustard, and bull thistle, which occupy your property. They can actually be found thriving after a prescribed burn, not eradicated. Fire isn't always the answer on a wetland. That's according to the Wisconsin Wetlands Association. Fire can destroy desirable wetland plants. Mowing is better. The Wisconsin DNR recommends at least a full year of preparation before an initial burn on a parcel is ever undertaken. And that's because of super fires. Park rangers have been warning us for years about uncontrollable super fires because of accumulating fuel. Without the proper preparation, this parcel is a super fire waiting to happen. And then there's the smoke. Smoke from a wetland burn is thick and black, especially if it has cattails in it. Horicon marsh officials compare it to a tire fire. And lastly, I just want to touch on my personal experience having lived next door to this property for so many years. Steve has an associate degree. My husband has an associate degree in fire science, and he was a firefighter for 20 years. One of the fires he fought was an out-of-control fire on this very property, your property before it was yours, that began as a controlled burn. Our neighbor, our common neighbor, your donor, still has hundreds of acres that he continues to maintain without fire. He's out there all the time mowing and knocking back weeds. Our offer to purchase still stands. We're ready to take all this liability off of your hands by buying this parcel from you. It sounds like a win-win to me. And I think that's all I really wanted to say. You can read my comments tonight. I included a few things directly. I printed off some of my sources. I've included all of my sources, and I think you'll find it very interesting and quick read.
Thank you. Thank you. Is there anybody else who wishes to comment? Seeing nobody approaching the podium, we will move to the district administrator's report. Dr. Onsager.
Thank you. Couple things. We just had a group of students, and I'm drawing a blank on the number of them. They were middle school students that spent all of last week in DC, June 11th through the 15th. I followed them on, they shared with me their pictures, etc. From everything I saw, they were having a wonderful and glorious time. They were busy. They're probably tired, probably still sleeping because they were on a run from the time they got there to the time they left, but what a great experience of seeing everything. I'd like to talk to them because, and I haven't heard, they were visiting the White House right around the time that the president decided to make his stroll out to talk to the media. And so I don't know how close they were or where they were at, but they were supposed to be there that same day. So it'd be interesting to see if they actually were in the area. But that was a group of middle school students led by 2 of our middle school teachers. This week is the start of Summer Excel. So today was the first day of Summer Excel, which is always a great time. And later on this summer, probably in August, Chris Keenan, who is the Summer Excel principal, will come and give a report of how it went. And then lastly, I have is last week started lunches for Vikings again. If you remember, that was a collaboration between the district and the community. The community really embraced that and has taken off and is running that. They are providing sack lunches to any student, anybody who walks up. Last year they were at Kaganza, Fox, and Sandhill. Based on lessons learned and feedback, this year they are at Kaganza, serving at 11:30. They then go to the high school near the baseball diamonds, starting to serve at noon, and then they go out to Bayview Heights, starting at 12:30. There are still opportunities if anybody's interested in volunteering to help out. Primarily, when I looked at the list this morning, they still need people in August. This runs through the end of August. And if you're interested, the website is lunchesforvikings.com. And on there, if you're interested in signing up and volunteering, there's spots to do that. So that's all I have for tonight.
Thank you, Dr. Onsager. We'll move next to the, I'm sorry, are there any questions or comments?
I just have one question. Is it the same lady running the program as last year?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, she's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anne Marie.
Yeah.
Kids lined up outside the high school at 11:45 today in that heat.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
It's popular.
I have a quick question. Do you know why they added, and where exactly is Bayview Heights?
Bayview Heights is on 51 as you're going from Stoughton toward McFarland. It's the trailer park.
Oh,
Just
okay.
before you get
And so what their feedback was is there's a lot of students there that could not get into
Yeah.
the city to grab a lunch. So they are now
Yeah, that's
going
okay.
there to distribute.
I'm glad that they're doing that.
Anything else? Moving then to the consent agenda.
I move approval of the June 4th, 2018 regular board meeting minutes. I move approval of the May 31st, July 3rd, 2018 check register and June 13th, 2018 P-card transaction report as presented. We would like to say thank you to the following individuals and groups and move approval of their donation to the district. $5,599 from Stoughton Sport Booster to be used for end zone camera. $1,612.50 from Stoughton Sport Boosters to be used for pool video system. $1,000 from Stoughton High School Parent Group to be used for support Stoughton High School FFA program. And $750 from Burgers LLC, Culver of Stoughton, as a scholarship, and related cash donation for budget adjustment for $8,961.50. I move approval of permanent professional educator contract for Kelsey Nelson for the 2018-19 school year and permanent administrator contract for Dana Tate and Jessica Hart, effective at the start of the 2018-19 school year. Move to approve the resignation of Alisa Koopman, Kristen Flack, and Kylie Hager at the end of the 2017-18 school year. Move to approve the resignation of Amy Connor and Mary Hermes, effective immediately for the 2018-19 school year.
The consent agenda has been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Did we miss?
Yeah, and I think it was, oh.
It was on the agenda, so I think
I'm sorry.
So, it is, it's part F.
Part F on the agenda itself.
Oh, yeah. It's just not on the
It's not on the
consolidated
motion.
consent agenda.
Here, okay.
So worded would be move approval of the 2018 Wisconsin Interscholastic Athletic Association Senior High School membership.
So I move approval of the 2018-19 Wisconsin Interscholastic Athletic Association Senior High Membership Renewal.
The consent agenda has now been moved. Is there a second? Second. Second by Mr. Jackson. Is there discussion?
Yeah, the WIA membership, is it, I guess I'm thinking like with collegiate level sports, you always have equal numbers of girls and boys sports or men's and women's sports. And obviously it doesn't seem like it applies here. I don't know a lot about it.
So the WIA is the High School Athletic Association that pretty much most, if not all, public and private schools that have athletic programs belong to. They are the ones that run the state tournaments and all the postseason events. There's also in some bylaws that if you are not a member of the WIA, the number of non-WIA schools that you can compete against is limited. So it would affect, if we're not part of the WIA, it would affect our conference membership, etc. What you're talking about, the equal distribute of men's and women's sports, boys and girls sports, that falls under Title IX.
Okay.
And Mel constantly looks at our sports, making sure that we're comparable in the number of offerings we have within the Title IX guidelines
Okay.
for both boys and girls sports.
But those are not necessarily WIAA.
Some are,
Those
some
not
aren't.
equal
So,
numbers.
so for example, some of the sports teams that we have are WIA, some are not. Our lacrosse team is not a WIA because it's not a recognized WIA sport.
All right.
We also have some that we co-op with. So lacrosse, we co-op with girls lacrosse, not a WIA. We also co-op with 6 schools, and the board approved earlier in the spring the co-op for girls hockey. So we have an offering of girls hockey, but we co-op because we can't run it by ourselves.
Okay, I understand. Thank you.
Are there other questions or comments? I have a question that I want to ask Tim. Can you talk a little bit about what is done in terms of an exit interview when we have staff resignations?
I'll let, if Becky wouldn't mind coming to the podium, because Becky runs the exit interviews, and that falls under her department.
Everyone,
Becky.
hi, how are you tonight? Everyone has sent information that acknowledges their resignation or retirement, and in that communication, that they are given 3 ways that they can give us feedback in an exit interview. One is to meet with me personally, one is to fill out a hard copy sheet, and one is to go to a Google form.
Okay. And can you talk a little bit more about how that's working out in practice?
Yeah, I think the response, I actually just looked at the Google form this afternoon. Our response is pretty good. I think it's getting better. It hasn't always been, we haven't always heard from everyone, but we've had a number of them come back hard copy. I have had a couple face-to-face, but most of them are choosing to use the form.
Okay. What-
And then usually what happens is that information is collected and reviewed by the ERC to see if there's any information in that that we can use to better what we do here.
How often is that done?
With the ERC,
Yes.
that's, in the past, that's been done once a year.
Other questions or comments? Julie?
Now that you brought that up, I'm thinking, do we ever, if a veteran teacher wants to resign and just send a letter or something, do we ever try to talk that person into, well, what's going on, why do you want to resign, why, and then try to keep that teacher in, for, I don't know, like probably the teacher can be moved to another school, or if the person is not feeling well in that school, or looking for something different. Do we ever do that?
I would say by the time we know that someone is resigning, they already have another position. So for me to know ahead of time, I usually don't. I would say in the buildings, what we've really been working on over the years is to talk with our staff before it gets to that point. And so hopefully principals would hear what it is that might, what they could do maybe to make their job more meaningful, or if there was something they needed with that position. If there's transfers, they all have the right to apply. Our handbook language says that if they apply for a position that they're qualified for, the district will interview them. And we honor that in all cases. So generally, by the time my department hears that there's a resignation, when you see these on there, I'm usually surprised myself that I haven't heard that. I don't know about the buildings, if they have been aware of it.
Can I? However, I know, of course, is the person may not. I mean, I'm not gonna resign without having any other job, most probably, unless I just don't wanna continue working in the area. But I know we're not private companies, but I'm trying to think about how other institutions do, and sometimes, even if the person have a different option and already applied for another job, sometimes we can convince that person to stay. And I went through the same thing working for other companies. My husband went through the same thing. In the end, if we have a good offer, and I'm not talking just necessarily about money, but well, something that may keep myself thinking, I'd rather stay here. I mean, I'm gonna have, I still have a few years that I can stay and then retire or something like that. I don't know. I mean, maybe that practice could be applied. I don't know. I just is.
I think there's always room for improvement in that. But again, I think it's more important that we're doing it before they get to the point where they start looking. I mean, we have to be working on the retention all the time. And I mean, we've been through a lot of training with our Studer group. And what I would say is just so significant that we just hear over and over again is that we have to re-recruit. And we have to build relationships with the people, especially principals in the building with their staff. That's really what's key. And that doesn't mean that just because someone leaves, it's because they didn't have a good relationship. Because there are things that take people, you know, spouses get different jobs, they want to relocate. But if people are leaving because they're not happy with us, there are things I think we need to do throughout the school year to keep encouraging people and to be building that relationship with them.
Yeah.
That's where I think we really have to focus our energies.
Me too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone else? I think you're free, Becky. Run. Any other questions, comments, or discussion on the consent agenda? At this point, let's go ahead and call the question. All in favor of approving the consent agenda as moved, please so signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Any abstentions? The consent agenda is approved. Next on the agenda, we have committee reports listed. I don't think any of the committees have met since the last board meeting, so if there are, unless there are any new developments, I recommend we simply skip over this.
Sounds good to me.
Yep. And Joe isn't here, so. Next on the agenda is the 4K program review. Hello, Judy.
Hello, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Great.
What are you going to tell us about the 4K program?
4K program review. I was here a few months ago, but prior to some new board members, so based on your recommendation the last time I was here that I catch people up a little bit, this PowerPoint, while it might be redundant for some of you because you saw slides like this last fall when we started, it'll just be to help catch up some people that are new. So a program review is something that we have done, I don't know, 8 times in the last 10 years, where we identify a curricular area and look at it comprehensively. It does not include a review of the faculty or of the staff, so it's not an evaluation of personnel, but of everything else, resources they use, the facilities, the link to standards, the feedback from community. So we really try and look at all aspects of it, gather information, and then put it together to draw some conclusions and make some recommendations. So as I start with this, our purpose was to do this periodic review of some aspect of the 4K-12 comprehensive educational programming, looking at equitable opportunities to learn, accessing quality experiences, focusing on social, emotional, and academic growth. And that would apply to any of our program reviews. Why are we doing the 4K program review right now? The contract speaks to, our contract with our 4K providers speaks to a 5-year cycle to review. This one was more formal than our first 5-year review, looking at transition to a new 4K district administrator. I played that role this year, but it will transition to Aaron Conrad next year. We had questions from the community about the location of some of our sites, that they all kind of tend to be in the same place. We've had family comments that many of our sites take place in a church. Church things can't be present, like we can't have kids having to go past crosses or things like that. However, it still is a characteristic of whether or not families choose that site as a 4K site. So we wanted to take a look at that. And we wanted to look into 4K to 5K, those transitions. So that's kind of why we looked at that this fall. These are the elements of a program review. It's really just the protocol and the sequence of events. It starts early in the fall, and we start defining our goals and our purpose and a lot of collecting data. of everything someone would be interested in or might have a question about. We tried to gather lots of artifacts and documents and make them available to what we call external reviewers, people who have competence in the field, but don't necessarily know how it plays out in Stoughton. So they can bring their expertise to us and then give us feedback from their expertise based on what they learned. They spend one day here with us, but spent a lot of time previewing materials. I think LinkedIn here might be the communication we made with them. So this is just the protocol that we follow. As background information, this is some of the enrollment data. Starting into 2012, we disaggregated that data so that we had, our number of sections isn't here, but the percent of the students enrolled that are students with disabilities, the students in economically disadvantaged situations, and the percent of English learners. So you can see some of the demographic data and the enrollment data that we have. Whoops. As background, there are 3 different models for 4K programming. We follow the Model 3. Model 3 is a community-based partnership. This represents something that the initial study team 10 years ago recognized as the best model for Stoughton. In Model 3, we partner with daycare institutions that want to offer a 4K program. And in that partnership, the daycare hire the teachers to teach the 4K instruction, the curriculum. And the district provides curriculum, provides professional development for those educators, provides some other resources, some transportation. There's kind of a list in their contracts that the district provides for that. And then that instruction takes place in the 4K sites. This was important to our partners when it started because the partners would have lost students if we hosted 4K someplace else in a school. We also don't have space in our schools to adopt our 200 or so 4K students. So this was the right model for us. And there are links to that as well. These are the learning experiences that our 4K children have come to be familiar with. And they go to school. Most of them go to school in the morning. And then go on to either wraparound care, so that is daycare at the same site for the afternoon, or may be transported to, if the 4K program doesn't have wraparound care, they may be transported to another 4K or in-home or to their own, or their families. They make a home for the afternoon. We do have a couple of afternoon programs. This is the link. Let me see if I can get through there. This is the link of the information that was shared with the external reviewers, which is quite comprehensive, and it has many links within the document, but this is all of the information, those artifacts that we shared with our external reviewers before they came, and they did just a ton of study with us on this. So the reviewers, as I said, spent one day with us gathering tons of information. They did interviews. They've talked amongst themselves about things that they discovered. And then they went away. They worked all day. And then they went away and submitted a document like this, each one individually. I took all 3 of those documents and consolidated them and took the names of the reviewers off, so that this is a comprehensive review of what the reviewers provided for us. The column on the right, key points, are things that the internal team were trying to synthesize so that the key points weren't listed by the external reviewers. Those were our notes from their remarks. If you have an opportunity to read that, this is a link to that document. You'll find that in some cases, one reviewer would have said something, and the other two reviewers agreed with that. So rather than copying it 3 times, that comment is just made so that you know that all 3 reviewers would agree with that point. So then it comes time to piece all of this together. All of this information comes back to an internal review team, which include the site administrators, the 4K educators. It included the 4K district administrator, the professional development, so all of the people internally in our 4K program came together to review the materials, to review the recommendations, and think about how they wanted to organize that. And so this is how that group came together and said we need to organize this into 5 big themes. And then that group also came back together again and drafted an action plan with some goals around those 5 themes. So there is an action plan working that draws information from the external reviewers' recommendations. And I'm here now, full circle in the spring, to share with you the 5 themes and the initial goals that were drafted this spring as a result of this program review. So the first one is a 4K purpose and relationship statement that people that are involved need to, the measurable goal by winter of 2018, to create a 4K handbook as an internal guidance and communication with 4K sites that defines the purpose, goals, and relationship of Stoughton's 4K program for onboarding new staff and communication between all parties associated with 4K. So that will require lots of people's input to do that, which requires us to schedule meetings to have those conversations, a review again of the reviewers' comments about what we need to address. So theme number 1. The second one was about collaboration and communication, that by the fall of 2020, representatives from 4K and 5K will have met collaboratively to document trajectories of math literacy and social emotional development, to be routinely shared with all 4K and 5K educators and inform instruction. When I say trajectories, it's about where the children start at beginning of 4K and then what the progress or the direction that they should be moving. And because we follow the 4K standards, the WEML standards, and the Common Core State standards for 5K, those things need to be able to intersect so that it's clear for 4K where they're going in 5K, and it's clear for 5K to know what 4K is expected to do so that we don't have confused expectations of one another. 4K and 5K have not historically met together. Information is shared, but not necessarily in collaborative meetings, and that was something that was common in the reviewers' remarks, was that this should happen. It probably wouldn't happen with all of 4K and all of 5K together because it's a disproportionate representation. We have 12, 13 or so, 14 5K teachers and 5 4K teachers. So we probably need representatives from sites and from both grade levels. All of that's part of an action plan that's being drafted. The third theme is around professional development. By fall of 2018, define the next learning for 4K educators that may intersect with the next learning defined for 4K to 12 system. This is an effort to look at reducing redundancy. If it is a topic of learning that is important for 4K through 12, it might be able to happen together rather than 5 5-year-old kindergarten through 12th grade teachers and later 4K teachers. So we might be able to take advantage of some common learning, especially in the lens of social and emotional learning, which is going to be an emphasis for us this fall. Fourth one is on equitable funding. By the end of 2018-19 school year, create an outline to aid in understanding the guidelines for funding Stoughton's 4K program and the autonomy of 4K sites to budget resources to achieve our goals. And when I say our goals, that is 4K sites and 4K through 12 academic and social emotional goals. So there's a lot of understanding and learning that can happen in this theme. And finally, the fifth is about district supports and services. This is part of what 4K sites get as a result of partnering with us to provide 4K services. By the fall of 2018, identify the district services, personnel, and subsequent process for accessing that personnel by all 4K sites. So they might have questions for a school psychologist, for a school counselor, for special education services. So all of those things are points of contact, and we've found that there's some confusion about how to access that or how frequently those services might be available. They're not a full-time service at each 4K site, but available to the educators. So it's kind of about making sure that we understand how to get a hold of those people, how to access those services. One that became prevalent in the review was how to access services for English learners. As you can imagine, that can be a frustration when a student comes to school for the first time with no English. And there's a compassionate concern by our 4K educators that they're not doing enough, when really they are doing a great job, because it's all about acquisition of language, which we're better to do that in than 4K. So those, what we're working on now are our sparkling recommendations for our youngest learners. And again, there's an action plan working as we speak, and that's something that, as you can see from the goals, will take us a year to 2 years to fully realize. So I'm open for questions. I don't know.
Kathleen?
Judy, you mentioned, concern about the 4Ks being in churches. My understanding is all of them are, correct?
No,
Or
La
no?
Petite is not in a church.
Okay.
And
What?
Pumpkin Patch.
Pumpkin Patch, okay. So, do you see parents going, like, outside their neighborhood, I guess?
Completely. None of our, these are not boundary driven at all. And so when we do enrollment and registration in the winter, we do that January-ish for all families of 4-year-olds. They are invited to an open house at each of the sites, and they can go and meet the staff and see what the facility looks like, and then they can make choices about which of the sites they would like to attend. And they set priorities, or they rank them. And it's unusual that they don't get their first or second choice.
Okay.
It tends to be kind of, this is where my brother went, of course I'll go
Yeah.
here. But it was just that a year ago, for the first time, we heard comments about there are more churches than non-church environments. So one of the things we wanted to look at is, are we in a position to add more sites? And if we do we want them in a different side of town than where all the rest of the 4K sites are? And do we want to make sure that it's not in a religious facility? We determined that we aren't in a position to add more sites, so that's kind of moot. However, it's documented now, and we're very aware that we wouldn't add another site that is in a religious place.
Okay. Before the kids get to age 4, is there a birth to 3 program?
Yes.
And How is that accessed?
Kelly can probably speak to that better than I can, but that we're aware of children, we try and track the children from birth. And so knowing of siblings, knowing of birth records, so that we know students that are growing up in Stoughton. There's lots of communication venues, in case we miss people, about coming to a 4K registration. And any student with concerns about a disability or anything
Yes.
like that, those students access first student, what's the word for Head Start?
For special, it's called Birth to Free.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and
Child Find.
Child Find is us.
Yeah, right, okay. So,
Like, yeah, so if somebody with an infant called and said, I'm worried about my child's speech development, is that like a referral to Weissman Center or this program that?
yeah,
Just-
yeah.
Sorry.
It would-
I just, you know, so they're,
So our
Well-
legal responsibility is to find kids from ages 3 to 21. That's our child find.
Okay.
So when it's an infant up until age 3, doctors usually do referrals, parents do referrals, and it can be through the county, it can be a private agency, but that's a separate entity than us. So we're not responsible, we really
yeah, I
don't
didn't think we were
do
responsible,
any
it's just-
special ed services
Yeah.
for a student that's birth to 3. When they hit like 90 days before their 3rd birthday, they're referred to us if concerns still are in place. And then that triggers us to do that evaluation to receive our services. And our requirement is to, as soon as they turn 3, we're providing services. So
Okay.
the evaluations and everything are done prior to them turning 3.
right, thank you.
What type of services are we providing then at 3?
It's speech and language therapy,
So is
it
someone
can be
going to a
occupational
house?
therapy, special ed, early childhood support. So it's anything that qualifies as a disability, and there's certain criteria that's set for that. So speech and language is a disability in and of itself, so the state has set forth certain criteria that qualify them for that services. Early childhood, usually there's a significant developmental delay, and they receive support from a licensed early childhood special ed teacher.
So where is that happening?
That's happening in the community.
Okay, just
Mhm.
out in
So-
private residence is not happening, like, they're not coming to,
They'll go to homes.
okay.
They will go to the area daycare, but it's
Okay.
usually, yeah, or the 4K programs, wherever in the community that child is at most of the time.
Yeah, with our kids who were English language learners, they did it in the daycare.
Okay.
Yeah.
Other questions? Go ahead. Alice?
Just talking about the different sites, is there a 4K site on the east side of town?
No, they're all very centralized.
They aren't they? Everything's kind of.
They're the people that applied to be 4K sites when
Right.
we launched the program.
Mhm.
And we accepted the 5 sites that applied, and now we have been that way forever. We've invested heavily in the staff, in the professional development, the expectations, the site administrators. I don't think it would be a good relationship, partnership to say, we're not going to have you be 4K anymore because you're in a church or you're in the same space. I know that's not what you're suggesting. So these are our spaces right now. And one of our questions in the program review was, are we ready to add another site? Do we have the enrollment? Now, our enrollment really hasn't changed that much. Are we ready to add another site? Which one of our criteria, we do have identified criteria now for adding a site, which that wasn't as clear as we wanted it to be, so we do have that now. But we wouldn't want it to take away from a site that is already functioning, so that would be one of our criteria. Should we have an enrollment that would suggest we could have more sites?
Steve?
Well, with regard to sites and churches, I did read in that one narrative table of contents document that we have district staff housed at one of the sites. And that's Martin Luther, right?
It's incorrect.
Oh, that's
So,
incorrect?
It is incorrect. District staff had a workspace for when they were there.
Okay.
And when there are many students in one site, she was probably there more
Okay.
than she was at other sites, but she is not their employee.
Okay.
And so it was a probably misunderstanding
It gave the
because they
impression,
saw her
yeah.
around a lot,
Yeah.
that she belonged to them, so.
Yeah, it was like, wow.
Yeah.
A few more. On your presentation, theme number 2, which had to do with curriculum, 2 years seems like a long time to have this document completed. So I'm wondering, is there a reason why 2 years? Are we anticipating a change in curriculum so the timing of fall 2020 aligns with that change in curriculum, or maybe?
We haven't done this before
Oh,
at
okay.
all. 4K's curriculum is very well articulated, a pacing guide, they know what they're doing on a given week in both math and literacy and social emotional. The same is true for 5K, but they haven't had this conversation about how they intersect, which won't happen quickly. I mean, that's going to be a lot of work, number one. Number two, the 5K curriculum in literacy is changing for 18-19 school year. So while we used similar resources in 4K and 5K literacy instruction, that will change this year. So 4K will remain with the materials they have. 5K will change, so that'll be new to all the 5K teachers to even know how does this look, how do these resources inform our standards as well. So I think between those two things, a final document probably isn't likely before the fall of 2020.
Okay.
It could be that it gets done before that,
Yeah.
but I think it would be a challenge.
So, here's a question. With Judy leaving, who will follow through on the key points?
Well, there's lots of people in place for that.
And I'm also thinking, sorry to
No,
interrupt you,
that's
Judy,
fine.
with Erin being new to the 4K program,
Right.
how do we ensure that, we're on target to hit those key points?
Right. So I think Amy Rock, who is our professional developer and our 4K kind of collaborator.
Which
she is amazing.
She gets super positive.
Yes,
marks.
she is super positive, super involved with all of the sites, super involved with all of the educators, knows many of the children. So she is really, pardon me?
Sorry to interrupt again, but she's only a 0.2 FTE towards a 4K program.
Correct. Mhm.
Will we change that a little bit?
I don't think we need
Okay.
to.
Okay.
No. She works with our educators once a month for a half a day on a Friday when they don't have 4K students. So they get professional development a lot, actually, significantly more than 5K through 12 do in hours spent together and learning. So we've invested heavily in that professional development so that there can be a link between 4K and 5K. Erin Conrad and I have met and will continue to meet through in the next 2 weeks to make sure that all of our working action plan document that started, all of this work, she's followed our work, of course, through all of this year. Cheryl Price has been kind of a liaison for the site administrators, and she will probably still be able to help us with that. And that tends to be more administrative things, and which we didn't see a lot of those in our themes, but it helps keep it all connected and tied up. And then, of course, all of this will be shared with Kate, my successor, and so that'll be one of her things to do.
So if I can just follow up on Steve's question quickly, Judy. In terms of accountability for the 5 themes and who's going to be responsible for creating the 4K handbook. If I wanted to write down the name for the person who's accountable for all of that stuff, who is it?
In our working document, that's one of the columns that we have. When is it due? Who's working on it? And who's the point person for that?
Okay.
So I don't know if you're looking for one of those in particular.
Ultimately, it's
It'll be
Kate
Kate.
and Aaron working together
Yeah.
to make sure that all this happens.
But it'll, I mean, there's different people who will
Correct.
do each of these themes, but as that rolls up, ultimately it will be Kate that has to make sure that it all gets done.
Okay, thank you.
Great question, yes.
And I'd like to a little bit follow up on that. And this is not a knock on any one individual. However, some decisions on the 4K program are being told to the administrators by a non-district employee. And so maybe we can also reflect on that decisions, that when administrators have questions, that they're being told by a district employee versus a non-district employee. Assuming that the weight of a district employee, to me, would represent the district's program, even though it might be a consultant or a contractor supporting the program, it would seem to me that the district would be the one, to me, I mean, everybody's got their own opinion, but it would seem to me that the district would be the one telling the administrators or teaching educators, this is the direction.
Was that a concern you heard from site administrators?
Yes.
They have not shared that with me at all. I was at all of the meetings, so it wasn't, I mean, I would say it was very collaborative. The people, Amy was there, Cheryl was there, I was there, and Aaron was there for part of it. So I know when there are challenges or struggles that site administrators have, they have contacted any point of contact. That could probably be tightened up and make only one point of contact. One has most of the history, one has most of what the educators have learned, one has a share of authority maybe, but maybe not the history or the professional development. So it's been kind of a tandem thing. It surprises me that that's a concern of the site administrators, but I'll reach out to them, and if in fact that they would prefer that.
I applaud the consolidation of the 5 themes and the direction that this is going, because I think it's, I've said it before, I think the 4K program, it's a lot of parents' first exposure to the district, and so having, that ownership by the district of the program and these documents and processes in place, I think will be very helpful.
Yep, I agree, thanks.
Yeah, I'd like to second that too. The 4K program has been tremendously helpful for our family, and I really appreciate seeing the systematization, the attempt to develop it and standardize it and move it forward with an accountable process. So thank you for that.
Certainly.
Are there other comments or questions? Jolie?
Yeah, I'm gonna follow what Frank said. I think 4K has been really great. As a parent, it was awesome for us. And I was always very proud to say, because we started even before Madison and all that, so I was always proud to say, we do have a 4K. Following also with what Allison was asking about having, we don't have sites on the east side, for example. Do we have like any help for families that cannot get to 4K? There is a transportation.
There is transportation to the morning sites, to and from the morning classes, not for the afternoon. That was a thing we looked into also. Do we need transportation for the afternoon? The reviewers said no, based on where you might want to invest your resources. That isn't what they would do first. So that was a question that was.
So there were not families in the afternoon that were requiring any of the help to take it. Okay, well, that's good. And, because I saw in the data that you show 33%, I think, was of disadvantaged.
Right, economically disadvantaged.
Yeah, so I was wondering
Right.
because of that.
Right.
And do you have any data also of how many students stay in the site having daycare assistant after they end?
So how many take advantage of daycare at the end of their 4K in learning?
Yeah.
I'm gonna guess it's almost 100% that go to a site that has wraparound care, take advantage of the wraparound care. It's probably why they chose the 4K site that they did, because that's their, but I can collect that data
I
for
was
you.
just curious. Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions or comments? John?
Yeah, theme 4, equitable funding. Can you elaborate on the feedback that you received that led to that theme and the goal that you've listed there?
There's a lot of confusion. Actually, there's a lot of confusion about funding education altogether. Everything from where we get our money in the first place and how that works with property and state and federal and all of that. So some of those, so it's, based on a per pupil allocation, that we get the resources we have which are different than every community around us. But then, given that we have our per pupil allocation, there's a lack of understanding about who determines where that money goes. So we contract with our partner sites, the 4K sites, say this is how much money you get per child, and then it is up to them. So we don't say you have to spend X% on salary, you have to spend X% on construction paper, you have to spend X% on whatever they do. So early on, we were hearing concern from some of the educators that the technology allocation was inequitable. We don't provide a technology allocation, and so some sites had iPads and some sites did not. One site had a smart board, the other sites did not. And so there was this sense of the district likes this site better. They gave them technology, but they didn't give it to us. And so there's a lack of understanding about who made those decisions about allocating the resources. And that is all based on the site administrator. And if it's a larger operation, La Petite isn't, just in Stoughton. So they have some La Petite rules they also have to follow mixed in with ours. So we were trying to just help the educators and the site administrators. We actually met with the site administrators this spring already to take a look at how do we figure out salaries? Where you guys spend money, do you want to compare what's going on? So we built the table, and it was interesting to the 5 site administrators because some of them paid X amount and Y in benefit and Z in professional development time or prep time, where the next one spent A on salary, B on benefits, and I think if they all got together, or at least 4 out of 5 of them got together, they could do it all the same way if they wanted to. But in analyzing their variety, I think each one of them kind of sat back and said, I'm cool with mine. That gives me a way to attract 4K educators because my benefits are better than the other benefits. My salary is lower, but my benefits are better. Or my teachers get way more compensated prep time, but my benefits are lower. And so all we did was really facilitate the conversation. We said, okay, now we're going to ask about this. And everybody went around the room and said, here's the hourly wage, here's the benefit. And when they step back, they could say, okay, I like what we're doing. It's not the same, but I don't think any of them said anything that would imply to me that they were going to change it so they looked more like another site. One of the sites gets additional resources thrown in from a church bonus or something, which feels inequitable to everyone else. The rest of them didn't get that bonus for fundraising or whatever it came from. But that is important for them to know that that came not from the Stoughton Area School District, not from their partner as a school district, and not from the state, but from one of the sites itself. And so I think some of that information, when we clear that up a little bit, it will help. I would speak also, we had a long conversation about this technology because that was kind of like the trigger that didn't seem fair. And the more we talked about it, the more we kind of came to the conclusion, do we really want children, 4-year-olds, who are only with us for 3.5 hours, to spend a lot of time on an iPad? And that really this is an opportunity for interaction and communication and play and practicing language, and that maybe the iPad isn't the right thing for that precious 3.5 hours that we have those children with anyway. So in that conversation, we weren't sure that, I mean, I think we walked away saying, I'm not sure the iPad is where we would spend our resources if they had a choice, they had some feedback in it, is that really where you'd spend the resources? It looks inequitable, so when you dissect it a little bit, it's important to know who makes the decisions and how those decisions are made.
So is this outline intended to be, the way that you're describing it, sounds to me like it's more of a communication tool than a tool for clarifying how funds are allocated, than it is any sort of requirements being placed on
Correct.
how those funds are used?
Correct.
Okay. And is the target audience then the sites themselves, the administrators themselves, or the teams themselves,
Yes.
or, okay.
I would add that I think it's valuable to the community because the community members have no idea how the 4K program is run, or very little idea. And you talk to any parent, and they think the district is paying that teacher's salary. They think, so there's a lot of confusion out there
Well,
about
the
the 4K
district
program.
is paying the teacher's salary.
But
It
not
may be-
directly, they're not directly
They're not
paying.
defining it.
We're not determining
Right.
how much they make.
Right,
But we
you're
are
providing you're providing the funding
Correct.
of a portion of the revenue for the 4K program. You're providing a portion of that money to the 4K sites so that they can decide how to pay
Right,
their
and it's
teachers.
a-
And there
it's
is inequity.
Good portion of
It's
what they
half.
have to work with.
We get about
Um,
$1.3 million as a district, and roughly $450 last year went to the sites. So about $600,000 stayed in the district and helped pay for some support, but a 0.2 FTE and other folks.
And the counselors, the psychs,
Right,
the
but it's
English
certainly not
learners.
$600,000. So there is a lot of inequity in the 4K sites and the program.
Okay.
And we've talked previously about technology as an example. Some sites are paying for their internet. Some sites, the district is paying for the internet and providing the service. So getting this straightened, and this is, I know a lot about this because my wife was a 4K teacher, and I spent a lot of time in the school, and I understand what's going on. And I've digested the data. So I have spent a lot of time. And that's why I'm saying I applaud this. Getting this on paper, getting this refined, getting it clear, making it equitable is the right move.
And helping them to make it, have the autonomy to make those decisions. So it may not be equal.
But we're having schools fighting, 4K sites, arguing with each other. Why are you getting internet
Right.
service? I have this old laptop that I have to use. You have, or not even a laptop, a desktop unit. And I have to pay for my own internet because
So it's important that the internal, as John is saying, that the internal population understand where the resource, what the resource is, and how that allocation works. Because we've been very careful not to assign how to allocate the resources. We do pay for all of the curriculum resources, a good share of the library books that they have. So there's a lot of funding that goes into 4K that isn't just the teachers or the technology tools. So that's part of those additional supports and services. And we just want them to understand who gets to make the decisions about that.
Yeah, thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? Hearing none. Thank you very much for this presentation. Next on the agenda are we move to the discussion action portion of the agenda. Item 5A is the staffing recommendations. Who will present those to?
This was, if you remember, we did the discussion last time, so in order to discuss it, we need a motion in a second.
Right. So at this point, we would, the chair would entertain a motion to approve the staffing recommendations we've discussed previously.
I'll do that. I move to approve the addition of 1 FTE kindergarten teacher at Fox Prairie, the addition of 1 learning strategist at River Bluff, and the reduction of 2 1.0, it's 2 FTEs, educational assistants at River Bluff for the 2018-19 school year.
The motion has been made. Is there a second?
I second.
Second by Tim.
So if you remember on this, this is our recommendation that we add a kindergarten teacher at Fox based on enrollment. We are exceeding our targets right now. Our target is 22 kindergartners in each section. We're currently at 23. It usually fluctuates. And so we're recommending, instead of waiting until August, we add it now so we can make the preparation. And then also, I believe Kelly and talked to it last meeting, based on our students' needs, based on IEPs and the incoming 6th grade in particular. We have several openings for educational assistants at River Bluff, and we're recommending that we hire a full-time learning specialist, special education teacher who has more training to meet the needs of the students, and we feel that we can then reduce the number of educational assistants by 2 if we add that 1 learning strategist, and that one is a cost-neutral type of thing. For the 1 learning strategist will cost about the same as the 2 educational assistants.
Is there any discussion? I see.
Sorry, actually, I do have something. So the educational, the EAs, those are positions that are, we've had resignations?
Yep, they're vacant right now.
Okay. And we're feeling like we're not going to need that.
We feel that the services that the learning strategist can provide the 1 learning strategist can give more support and more resources in working directly with the teachers than the 2 EAs.
Any additional discussion? Shall we call the question? All in favor of approving the motion to add a 1.0 FTE kindergarten teacher at Fox Prairie, add a 1.0 learning strategist at River Bluff, and to reduce 2 FTE educational assistants at River Bluff? All in favor of that motion, please so signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, the motion is approved. We move next to the issue of the 48 acres, and to open the discussion, we would Do we need a motion to open the discussion?
You can, if you are going to discuss it, you need a motion. If you are going to table it or you are going to do it later, you do not. But if you are going to discuss it, you need a motion to approve the MOU of understanding.
Is there such a motion?
I move that we approve the memorandum of understanding. Sorry, I don't have it dated 6/14/18.
There's
Habitat restoration and maintenance.
a motion has been made. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Yoli. Discussion. Judy, do you want to start us off?
Sure. 2 weeks ago, I was here with the memorandum of understanding that one of our attorneys, Frank Sutherland, drafted for us. And then there were some questions about exactly what we are agreeing to allow Quail Forever to do. And so that is in your document. Is it in red text in your document? What was
Yes.
added? Okay. So the part that was added after our last meeting is found in red text. Having listened to Julie Dixon, I recommend that where it says activities shall include, we may want to change it to activities may include, and then let the district and Quail Forever determine whether or not the burn is the right approach, or the mowing is the right approach, or the pulling of weeds is the right approach, so that it is not prescribing what you have to do, but is outlining what may be done, but needs to be done, something needs to be done to maintain the land. So we might change that word from shall to may, and then those are options.
So do I amend my motion?
If you wish.
Okay.
May I make a suggestion?
Yes.
Let's get all the discussion out, so
Great.
if there's additional amendment, we can do them all at once.
Perfect.
So,
Thanks.
Jolie?
You was first.
Yeah, but I called on you.
Yeah, he called on you. Get it.
Thank you.
I'm in charge here.
Yeah, I was very happy with the memorandum of intentions. I think I read, I'm sorry, but I couldn't get into, because I had problem with my emails and all that, and I couldn't open just now that, but I remember reading. There's not hunting activity.
Correct. There can be no hunting.
Oh, thank you. I also understand that it's not only burning, it is a group of different activities that are gonna be used to restore that. Having volunteered at the Arboretum many years ago, my husband actually was part of the restoration program, many of them years and years ago at the Arboretum. And even though there is, and I appreciate this document, yeah, there is things about invasive species, about the fires not being completely the answer. To restore a land, it requires a lot of different things. So, so I don't think it would really understand that it's only gonna be fire here. It's gonna be a lot of different things. So, having said that, I really think that we should continue with this.
John?
Yeah, do we feel like it would be in the interest of the school district to have a policy or procedure in place for approving burning any land that the school district owns? Just to make sure that there's diligence in the planning and
You can create a policy. I will tell you that we would not do a prescribed burn without taking it to the board.
Okay.
To get the authority to do it. We've talked about controlled burns at the board table numerous times. There were questions about us doing it. We would not move forward unless we would get the authority of the board for something like that. So you could have a policy, but right now, the way we operate, we would not do a prescribed burn anywhere without getting the board authority.
Personally, I feel like having that be part of a policy would hopefully give some sort of confidence to the community that we take the liability seriously.
And require a permit as well.
Does the county require us, or does someone require us to get a permit?
Yes, yes, you can't do a burn at all without a permit.
This is gonna sound like a really silly question. Are there any other school properties that we burn?
That any of our properties
Yeah.
that we burn? No.
If we agree to this, do they have to ask us before they burn? Or can they just burn it whenever they want to?
The way it's written right now, without a policy that says it needs to go, I mean, they could, I mean, the actual burns are pretty, there's a pretty small window of when you can do that. It can't be dry, it has to be, you know, so there's a lot of restrictions in getting the permit. But it could be that we include something in a policy that suggests that it go to the school board, whatever order you want. You get the permit first, go to the school board, get the permit. You don't want to restrict it so much that you miss a window of opportunity, but it does reflect some planning on our part and on Quail Forever's part, that you're not just going to do this.
The other amendment that you could do instead of activities may include, or you could amend point B where it says prescribed burning. You could amend that, conduct prescribed burning and somewhere in there only with prior board approval or prior, you know. So you could amend that section to say that the only way that they can do a prescribed burn is if they get prior approval from the board to do that.
And I would take it a step further, and I would add somewhere in here that any activity that requires a permit or approval, that permit or approval be obtained before the activity starts. So that would include prescribed burn, or perhaps disturbing a wetland or some other feature on the site. But I would think that as a district we would want only professionals doing prescribed burns, as this implies that Quails Forever could do the prescribed burn, and I would think that a professional would have liability insurance, Quails Forever would have liability insurance, and that would give us a little more comfort if a prescribed burn was needed.
Well, your mention of liability, we hold insurance on it, right? If we own the property?
But this would hold,
right.
They would hold us harmless.
Right, but things can always happen. I'm just wondering, what's the advantage in us owning these acres that, I mean, I know there's not supposed to be any hunting, but it's not like we're out there watching all the time. I worry a lot about the use of guns on school property. That would include those acres, I would think. And maybe I don't understand how the law works. It's not like we have a building out there, but, I know it was a gift, but can it end up being an expensive gift?
When this gift was presented to the district, there was no stipulations on what we had. So the district could decide to sell it. But before the district could sell it, it's my understanding, we have to go to the annual meeting in October and get permission from the community, the electors, and et cetera, in order to sell it. So if that is something that the board wants to pursue of selling this piece of property, we would have to get permission at the annual meeting in October before we could proceed and do anything of selling it.
The one thing that, so I'm a little torn on this whole idea of both sides of selling and the Quails Forever. I'm with Kathleen on there may, the memorandum of understanding may say no guns or no hunting on the site. However, I've read the website too. Their intent is to raise chicks so that they can prosper and someone else will hunt them somewhere. And I think as a district, we're promoting that activity, and it kind of takes us away from our recent stand on guns in general. So I'm torn that way. But I'm also, if someone donated land to us to use, and we chose to sell it, then if someone else had land and they wanted to donate it to us, maybe they would think twice and say, well, they're just going to sell it. And maybe that's just a far-fetched idea,
Well,
but
couldn't they stipulate? My
Right,
understanding
yeah,
is this land was
stipulate.
donated with no ties or binds.
yeah,
But
right. But as
I
we
would-
heard,
I would be very hesitant to accept, any sort of donation to the gift, and to the
Wait.
district that placed a limitation like that on it. Because what might be in the best interest of the district today might not be in the best interest of the district 5 years from now. And if I can just respond real briefly to your point about hunting, Steve. I think that there's a significant difference, and you and I may disagree on this, that there's a significant difference between the position that we've taken on guns in schools and hunting. I mean, we have board members who hunt. Hunting is something that is an integral part of the lives of many of the folks in our community.
I understand.
And I think that having Quails Forever raise birds that may eventually be hunted on land other than ours is not incompatible. You and I may simply just disagree on that, but I don't see that as antithetical to our mission.
Okay.
So, Allison?
One thing I do remember, Don first was saying when he was here, was there was no expectation that these birds that they raise would stay there. So in essence, it may help those that want to hunt them. They would be in other places that would be more accessible for hunters, but.
Tim?
And I first of all apologize. I may have missed some of this, but how is working with Quails Forever in not selling this property directly impacting our students?
It is not. The links that came with the executive summary from November 2017 and March 5th of 2018 kind of outline our whole history of 5 years, and where we have recently, in the last 6 months or so, come to the conclusion that this is really not a viable property for us to use for students.
Right, that's what I recall.
And Sandy Quayle was involved in that. We had representatives from the DNR, from the Conservancy, from 6 guys sitting upstairs saying, this isn't a piece of property that they wanted. They didn't want to manage it. They didn't want it to be part of Brownsville Conservancy because it's not contiguous to other land that they have. So I did kind of outline that in these other documents. It really isn't useful for us, but it is our land. And so the kind of place we have come to right now is if there's a useful way for it to become more back to its native environment or habitat, that might be a good use for that land. It doesn't preclude students from helping with the work out there, doing the mowing, doing the invasive species, putting up signage, any of those things, monitoring birds, monitoring growth. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity for environmentalists and conservationists to our students who have the interest to be involved. But it isn't something that we can use for whole groups. And so this is kind of we were going down a path that had a few different turns. If you're interested in selling the property, we have more than one party that's interested in that. And so that kind of opens up a whole nother path that we should pursue and study and find out what's going on there. It does have to go to the electorate to be voted on whether or not we can sell the electorate's property, because it belongs to the school district.
It belongs to the people,
The
not to us.
people and not to us. And so they would have to vote that it's okay to sell it. They can't give it away at all. And then there's a whole nother series of steps we would take if we're interested in selling the property.
Judy, is there anything in the memorandum of understanding that we've worked out with Quails Forever? Is it Quail? It's Quail Forever.
Quail Forever.
Sorry.
Mhm.
Is there anything in the memorandum of understanding that would prevent us from ending the memorandum and later selling the property if we wanted to do that?
We can terminate the permission granted here under its number 5. So by notice to Quail Forever at the address listed below, give them time to take equipment or mowers, whatever they have on the land of value off, and then take it to the electorate to sell and go find that path of who you will sell it to.
Other questions or comments? Jolie?
I just wanted to comment. I don't know how, I mean, I can see that for a fire, we, can come here and we'll need to approve that. But for any other activity, as Steve was saying, it will be kind of like a limitation. Anytime they're going to be doing something, and then they have to come and we approve the activity? That's not,
I think what was proposed was anything that required a permit.
Oh, okay.
And I don't know what requires a permit. If Joe was here, I feel confident he could tell.
Controlled burn, anything disturbing certain size of wetland. There may be some bat habitat if there's snags, so you have to look at critical habitat, potentially for threatened and endangered species, things like that.
Okay, so it's not for everything. Okay.
So the only thing on this list that would require a permit is the burning. So the other things are not permitted, or permittable, require a permit.
Okay, and that, if there's gonna be a burn, would that be, like set to, the community? It's gonna be burned, communicated to the community, that's what I mean? And of course, the neighbors and all that?
Is that part of the permitting process?
I don't know, that's my question. Do they announce that it's gonna be a fire, and like there's gonna be like newspaper or any public announcement?
I think you have to notify the fire department. There's a series of things you have to do. So as a board, I think Tim and Frank may have talked about, I think we would want
We'd want
to
board
know.
approval.
Yeah.
I would want board approval of any
Yeah,
burn.
I would want to see the plan.
Exactly.
I think we want to see all of that.
And I think to your point about communicating, for instance, with the neighbors, is that what you're thinking about?
Well, everyone,
And
if there's any
everyone?
public notice.
Right.
Okay.
I mean, I think that would be a good neighborly thing to do. I don't know that it's required by the permit. For sure, the fire department would be involved in that.
Sure.
Kathleen?
If we were going to go to the meeting in October and ask about selling, would Quail Forever I mean, there's really only 3 months between now and October, right? So, I mean, what level of urgency is there to, I guess, grant them access? It just feels like it'd be kind of, you know, well, here, you can be here, and then maybe not.
Well, I think one of the concerns that I have with this is that the property, and this is no criticism of Judy or anybody else, is that the property is essentially unmanaged currently. Is that fair?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's not a tenable situation for the neighbors in terms of the growth of weeds and the spread of, you know, obnoxious plants and things like that. So one way or another, something needs to happen, whether it's we sell it to somebody who is going to manage it, or hopefully is going to manage it, or we make arrangements to have it managed in a way that's consistent not only with the values of the district, but with our obligations as a property holder to the neighboring property owners. So I think, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Judy, as I so often am, that the attraction of the arrangements with Quail Forever is a way to have the property managed by people who know what they're doing in a way that's consistent with our district values. I think that's where this came from.
I agree. And that it is, there are safety precautions and liability insurance that comes with that particular group. And that it is not an expense to us by partnering with Quail Forever. So I think those two things are important also.
Does that make sense?
Yes, except not entirely, I guess.
Okay,
if it's a, you know, I understand could be very dry right now, and you know, maybe a bolt of lightning could set it off. But if it's that dry, we're unlikely to be able to get a permit to burn, and you know, it's not going to happen in a couple of weeks. And so again, I'm kind of brought back to, well, October's in the fall. Generally, we get the rains late summer and fall. I just, I guess I'm trying to think of the expression that isn't, you know, do we let them feel happy that they're going to have this property and a place to raise chicks and all that? If there's possibility of selling the property, it just, I don't know, it feels like we're
leading them on?
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you, Steve,
Yeah.
yes.
Well, I
A
think,
little bit, yeah.
speaking only for myself, I
Uh-huh.
think that it is, I would view it as inconsistent to approve this memorandum of understanding, then turn around and put the property up for sale this fall or next year. I think that we're making a choice tonight between those two options.
Okay.
However, if 2 years down the line, 3 years down the line, it's not working out with Quail Forever, they have the right to terminate the MOU too. They may say, you know, this isn't doing what we thought it would. We may say you guys aren't doing what we thought you would do, or you are doing what we thought you would do, but we just want to go in a different direction. I think that we would want to give this some time to work out. So I would be uncomfortable with the vote tonight where we vote to approve the MOU and then turn around and put it up for sale in 2018 or 2019.
Right, and that's kind of what.
Yeah.
And so from a legal perspective, totally separate from anybody out there volunteering, or if somebody just wanders onto the property and say takes a dive right onto their face and breaks something, do we have liability? Not that ever happens to people, right? Do we, is it our insurance then that could be liable?
Correct. This piece of
Right.
property is our piece of
It's ours,
property,
right?
and it's covered under our liability insurance like any other piece of property we have.
Yeah, and I guess my thing is, well, with that being a known factor, what benefit is there to us having it again? It seems like more of a liability than an asset.
Allison?
Well, where I would say that it's an asset is, one, it does give us a little bit of time to think exactly what we want to do with it, if we need that. The other thing is it still presents us with a good opportunity for students to be able to go out in smaller groups that are much more manageable. We're not turning buses around and that kind of thing. And we talked about last meeting that it would be more probably older students, you know, as opposed to like, you know, elementary, kindergarten, that kind of thing. And it would give them an opportunity to see how One Restores Land gives them an opportunity to see how this ecosystem works, how, you know, what it's like to reintroduce this species. And that's just related to this. There's probably a lot of other things that it could be used for. I mean, I've gone out there and walked around, and it's pretty nice in the winter. The summer is a little more challenging. It's pretty wet, but I think that it still presents us with a good opportunity for outdoor classroom space.
I also have to say that maybe directly, I mean, I agree with Allison about the small group, but maybe directly it doesn't represent like a huge benefit to the district if we look at our vision and all that. However, I believe as members of this community, we have to be also an example of how we take care of our land. And wetlands are one of the most important ecosystems that we have around here. If we are able to partner with other people that are gonna be experts in restoring that property, it will be a great example for others. So I believe it's our responsibility to do that. If we can do it, let's give an opportunity to this. If, like Fran says, if it doesn't work and we are overwhelmed with, well, we'll see what we can do. We probably will have to sell it. But at least we have to give an opportunity to see how we can restore this land.
Steve?
Last thing, maybe if we move forward with this MOU, there's nothing in the MOU around reporting out, and I have a few notes, and I'll share them with you, Judy. Like reporting out with some frequency, and would that go to the facilities committee? And maybe we could lay that out in here as well.
Okay. Other questions, comments? John?
Yeah, I'd like to echo what Yoli said, that the school district owns this land right now, and we have not found a way to effectively maintain it ourselves, and we are responsible for being the stewards of it as long as it's in our ownership. We have not, in the time that I've observed the school board, moved aggressively or in any way towards a consensus to selling the land, and the work that's been put into finding a partner that can in some way adequately maintain this land, I think has been a really positive, direction for us. And so, yeah, I don't know, I guess that's the summary of my experience.
Let me, no, I'm sorry, is there additional discussion? You sure? Anyone else? So the two concerns I've heard with the memorandum of understanding that have been raised. First is that we would like to add language that says that burning will be conducted only with prior approval of the board and after they've gotten the necessary permits. And then secondly, on the point that Steve raised, that there should be some provision for reporting out to the facilities committee. Does that fairly capture your concerns, Steve? And does that fairly?
And activities may include, as opposed to shall include.
Yes, so that's three things. So a couple options. Option one is we can vote on the motion that's as made. Simply call the question and vote up or down on the current memorandum of understanding. Second, we can add language to the memorandum of understanding and based on an amendment and vote on that. Third, we can defer the vote until we see yet another draft of the memorandum of understanding. Or I suppose fourth, we can approve the memorandum of understanding with an understanding that will be amended along the lines that we've discussed. I think all of those options are out there. What's your pleasure, ladies and gentlemen? What do you want to do? Mr. Coughlin.
I feel like there are two simple fixes that cover the greatest of our concerns. The activities may include fix and adding a point to conduct prescribed burning to say conduct prescribed burning with prior approval by the Board of Education. I agree with Steve's interest that we receive some sort of report or update from Quail Forever. And I feel like that if we need time to formulate that into proper language or language that we feel gives them appropriate requirements up front, then I could see us adding that or amending that to an approved document in the future.
Okay.
Are there
So
other thoughts?
if I understand what you're saying, please correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't want to put words in your mouth at this particular moment. What you are suggesting doing is amending the memorandum of understanding tonight and then going back and adding the reporting language later? Is that an approach?
Is that a motion? Because I don't.
I'm just trying to leave it open for
Okay.
discussion in case
Yep.
anybody else has a
Right.
better idea or wants
Okay.
to voice additional concerns.
So I would be happy to propose a motion to amend the memorandum of understanding if that is agreeable to the group.
Yes.
Yes.
Then I move to amend my motion
Yes.
for the memorandum of understanding habitat restoration and maintenance from 6/14/18. In paragraph 2, activities strike shall and have may include. Paragraph 2, sub B, conduct prescribed burning by permit and prior board approval. And where did I say I wanted to put that? And then with or other activities or otherwise agreed from time to time by parties in writing or by email correspondence and quarterly reports for facilities, annual report? Annual report,
I mean, what do you guys
facilities
think?
committee.
I think annual is good enough for me.
Okay,
Comfortable with that?
okay, annual report.
Ms. Egan, is the motion clear to you?
I think I caught
Yeah.
the changes in wording. I think the annual report to facilities may be a point on its own.
Okay.
Correct.
But from the gist of it, what I understand is Allison has amended her motion to approve or accept the memorandum of understanding that shall become may. There should be in paragraph in 2B, language that says they can only do a controlled burn with prior board approval and securing a permit, necessary permit, and then language in there that could be its own subset of an annual report to the facilities committee of the board.
The motion is, the amendment to the motion is made. Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion?
Yes. There may be other permits that might be needed. So I think to protect this district, that we should add something that says, you know, maybe it's, or other activities as otherwise agreed upon. Somewhere in here, we need to say something related to the possibility of obtaining other permits as needed.
May I make a suggestion? Following the word correspondence at the end of section 2, any activity that requires a permit shall also require prior approval by the Board of Education. Cool. Is that acceptable to you?
That is acceptable.
Thank you, Frank.
Is there any other discussion? Do we have a second? All in favor of the motion to approve the memorandum of understanding as amended, so signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Nay.
2 nays. Mr. Jackson and Ms. Hoppy. Any abstentions? The motion is approved. Judy? Thank you. That concludes the discussion action portion of the meeting this evening. I want to thank the board members again for your earnest and good faith participation in the discussion. This was not an easy issue, and this is something that's been here for a long time. The first time I was on the board was when this gift was made to us. And I appreciate the spirit in which all of you have approached the resolution, and I particularly appreciate Judy's efforts to bring it to resolution. She's left, so just pass the message on. Yeah. At this point, I want to run down the future meetings. We have a board meeting scheduled for July 2nd. Unless anybody particularly wants to be here for that meeting, I'm going to propose canceling the July 2nd meeting and moving, what was it we needed to do?
ERC to that night.
Right. ERC will remain that night, and I think we have policy set for that night as well. So some of us will have to be here anyway, but not for as long.
I'll be in town, so.
Yeah. We have a finance committee meeting set for July 16th. We also, over the weekend, I circulated an email to the executive committee, which is myself and the chairs of the 4 standing committees, so Mr. Fry, Ms. Sorg, Mr. Jackson, and Mr. Buban, related to potential meetings of the executive committee on, that can't be right, June 30th and July 9th?
July 6th, you said.
Well,
I said July 6th, but I was misled.
yes, that was my mistake. I was trying to multitask. It should have been July 9th and July 30th.
Is it July 30th and July 9th? Okay. And the purpose of those meetings would be to evaluate 2 potential consultants to assist us with developing the process for the district administrator's evaluation. So if you have not gotten back to me on the previous dates, Please get back to me as quickly as possible on the two dates the two new dates, July 9th and July 30th. I would like to have an evaluation process in place by a consultant retained and a process underway by mid-August so that we can appropriately set goals for the division, for the administrator for the coming year. This fall, we are going to hear presentations on each of the schools. We have a number of fairly new board members, and I think most of us are familiar with the middle school because I think most of us have kids in the middle school. But speaking for myself, I know very little about Kegonsa and have not had much to do with Fox Prairie for years and years. So we are going to have a series of presentations this fall from the administration of each of the schools, simply to familiarize ourselves with those schools and get an idea of what their specific strengths and weaknesses and the issues that they're confronting are. So Dr. Ansager and I are working to set that schedule up and communicate it to staff. We are also developing a set of presentations this fall on particular issues that I think are of interest to the board. Those include PBIS and the discipline system, school safety and the school resource officer, and special ed. So there will be additional topics coming, and if there are other things you would like to learn about this fall, please tell me and we will try to get them on the agenda as soon as reasonably convenient. That is all the business I have to raise this evening. At this point, a motion to adjourn would not be inappropriate.
I move to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved, and adjournment has been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? All in favor of adjourning the meeting, please so signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you very much, folks. Have a good evening.